In a small American town, once a bastion of integrity and pride, a new sheriff named Matthew Dogo, an ex-soldier with a tragic past, is determined to bring order to a lawless community controlled by corrupt businessmen and local politicians. But his efforts to expose their criminal activities and restore justice make him a prime target for assassination. Surviving the attempt on his life, Dogo embarks on a relentless pursuit of truth and vengeance that could tear the town apart. Before we dive into this gripping story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories packed with mystery and drama, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more coming your way. I took this oath for one reason: to do what is right, no matter the cost. The town of Silver Creek, a small rural town, had long been a forgotten corner of America. Its history was rich with untold secrets, buried deep beneath the quiet smiles of the townspeople. From the outside, Silver Creek seemed like any other town: rolling hills, wooden houses, small-town charm. But beneath the surface lay a web of corruption so thick that it choked the life out of its residents. At the heart of the town's darkness was Jack Montgomery, an oil magnate with a reputation that stretched far beyond the state borders. Montgomery controlled almost every facet of life in Silver Creek. His wealth reached into the police department, the mayor's office, the local businesses, and even the schools. His name was synonymous with power, and he had used it for years to manipulate the town to his will. But then the unexpected happened. A man named Matthew Dogo was elected as the new sheriff. Dogo wasn't just a sheriff, he was a man with a burning need for redemption, driven by the loss of his beloved wife, Emily, and their unborn child. They had died in a car accident that Dogo had always believed wasn't an accident at all. The authorities had brushed the case under the rug. No investigation, no questions asked. But Dogo could never let go of the feeling that Montgomery had something to do with it. The evidence was weak, but Dogo was relentless. His arrival in Silver Creek was met with mixed reactions. Some were hopeful, believing that a man like Dogo could bring change to their town, while others were fearful of his resolve. The police officers on Montgomery's payroll, the crooked politicians, and the local business owners who benefited from the corrupt system feared him. But Dogo wasn't there to make friends. He was there to dismantle a system that had allowed evil to thrive for far too long. On his first day, Dogo stood before his new team, a group of deputies that had long been part of the problem. Their faces were weary, their eyes hollow with resignation. They had accepted the corruption as a way of life. But Dogo's voice rang out with a promise that sent a chill down their spines. "I didn't come here to make nice with the enemy. I came here to destroy it. And I won't stop until justice is served." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. It wasn't just a new sheriff, it was the beginning of a battle for the very soul of Silver Creek. You can't fight fire without getting burned. And in this town, the flames are only growing higher. Sheriff Dogo wasted no time. He began his investigation into the shadowy dealings that had kept Silver Creek in chains for so long. The corruption was so deeply entrenched that every corner he turned led him to another hidden web of deceit. He started with the case of Ashley Reynolds, a young woman found dead in an alley behind a warehouse owned by Montgomery. The case had been dismissed as a simple robbery gone wrong, but Dogo's instincts told him otherwise. There was something darker behind her death, something no one had dared to uncover. As Dogo started to dig deeper, the walls began to close in on him. He uncovered a smuggling ring, trafficking illegal weapons across state lines, with Montgomery at the center. Dogo knew that exposing this would be dangerous, not just for him but for the people who had been complicit in this network of violence. But the more he uncovered, the clearer it became that this town wasn't just corrupt, it was rotten to its core. The businessmen who ran the town were not just criminals, they were untouchable. Montgomery had an iron grip on the entire town. His influence spread to the highest levels of government, and he controlled everything with money, fear, and intimidation. But Dogo wasn't afraid. His resolve was steadfast. He wasn't going to back down. As the investigation unfolded, Dogo began to realize that the corruption went far deeper than just Montgomery. It was the entire establishment, police, politicians, businessmen, and even some of the town's clergy, who were involved in a far-reaching conspiracy. They controlled the town's economy, the law, and its very spirit. They would stop at nothing to preserve their hold on power. But Dogo's discoveries didn't go unnoticed. Montgomery and his allies knew that their empire was under threat, and they were prepared to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. It was no longer just about crime, it was a war for survival. There are some men who cannot be allowed to live. And then there are men like Dogo, who must be silenced before they burn the house down. It wasn't long before Dogo became the target of the powerful men he sought to expose. A tip-off led Dogo to raid a warehouse, one of the many locations where Montgomery's illegal arms trade was taking place. Dogo had spent weeks planning this operation, collecting evidence, and coordinating with his few trusted officers. But as the sheriff and his team approached the warehouse that night, they were met with an ambush. The building exploded in a storm of gunfire as hidden gunmen opened fire from every direction. Dogo's deputies, though brave, were outgunned and outnumbered. The world around Dogo became a blur of bullets and blood. He had barely made it past the entrance when the first shot hit him. The searing pain in his abdomen took his breath away, and he fell to the ground, his vision fading to black. For a moment, everything went still. Dogo could hear the distant sound of sirens, but his body refused to move. He tried to stay conscious, but the pain was overwhelming. His last thought before losing consciousness was the realization that he had made an enemy of the most dangerous men in Silver Creek. As the dust settled and the chaos subsided, the townspeople were led to believe that Sheriff Dogo was dead. His body was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was severe. The town mourned the loss of their new sheriff, and Montgomery and his men breathed a sigh of relief. If you want to bury the truth, you better make sure the body stays down. For weeks, Silver Creek believed Sheriff Dogo was dead. News outlets ran the story of his death, and Montgomery's associates celebrated their victory. But what they didn't know was that Dogo wasn't finished. He had survived, and his will to live was stronger than ever. Dogo woke up in the hospital, his body broken but his spirit unyielding. His recovery was slow, and every day was a battle. The doctors were cautious, warning him that his injuries were life-threatening, but Dogo wasn't one to back down. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the fire that burned within him. He had lost his wife and child, but this wasn't the end of his story. Rachel Collins, an ambitious investigative journalist from a nearby city, had heard rumors about Dogo's survival. She had been following his case for months, and now, with Dogo's return, she saw an opportunity to expose the corruption that had plagued Silver Creek for years. She reached out to him, offering her help. But Dogo knew that trusting anyone in this town was dangerous. The corruption ran deep, and there were few people he could trust. But Rachel was different. She wasn't afraid to confront the truth, no matter the cost. With her help, Dogo began to rebuild his case, reaching out to witnesses and gathering more evidence. Slowly but surely, they began to peel back the layers of lies that had covered Montgomery's criminal empire. They thought they could kill me, but they forgot, I am the truth, and the truth doesn't die. The public release of Dogo's findings sent shockwaves through Silver Creek. A video confession from one of Montgomery's hitmen implicated the oil tycoon in a series of heinous crimes, including the murder of Ashley Reynolds. The confession provided enough evidence to put Montgomery and his allies behind bars, but it also made Dogo a target once more. The town, which had once been under the thumb of Montgomery and his allies, began to stir. The people who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption now felt a sense of hope. They started to rally behind Dogo, demanding justice. It was no longer just about one man's fight for survival, it was about the fight for the town's soul. But the battle was far from over. Montgomery and his allies were not going to give up without a fight. In a desperate bid to regain control, they orchestrated a series of violent reprisals. Dogo, now more than ever, was at the center of their plan to maintain power. Sometimes, the truth is not a shield, but a weapon. With the truth now publicly exposed, Silver Creek had become a battleground. The town's once peaceful streets were filled with protests, whispers of revolt, and political turmoil. Dogo had become both a symbol of hope and a symbol of resistance, but his role had come at a personal cost. As the sheriff continued to gather more support from the citizens, Montgomery's retaliation grew more vicious. Montgomery's men infiltrated the town, spreading chaos with the goal of destabilizing Dogo's efforts. Rachel Collins, now working tirelessly by Dogo's side, found herself the target of a smear campaign, her reputation publicly attacked. Her credibility was questioned on every news outlet, and her life became a constant threat. Every step she took was shadowed by danger, yet her resolve never wavered. She knew the story was bigger than her, bigger than all of them, and she would see it to the end. Dogo, still healing from his injuries, began to feel the weight of what was at stake. He had been a soldier once, but this fight felt different. He had always fought for the right thing, but here, the very town he had sworn to protect seemed determined to tear itself apart. He realized that Montgomery wasn't just after him, he was after the entire town's spirit. Montgomery was willing to destroy everything just to remain untouchable. And yet, for all the chaos, there was still a flicker of hope. The people of Silver Creek, even those who had long been under Montgomery's thumb, were beginning to rise. They started to share what they knew, offering pieces of the puzzle that would ultimately bring down Montgomery. Whispers of deep-seated betrayal within Montgomery's own ranks reached Dogo's ears. Could the very men who had served Montgomery for years be the ones who would bring him down? But time was running out. Montgomery had given Dogo a deadline that would determine whether he lived or died. Dogo had just 2 weeks to bring Montgomery down, or else his family, including Rachel, would pay the price. The ghosts of the past don't just haunt you, they shape who you become. As Dogo worked tirelessly to uncover more evidence, an unexpected visit threw him off course. Maggie, his sister, who had been living far away after their parents' untimely death, returned to Silver Creek. She had left years ago, unable to bear the dark cloud that hung over the town. Dogo had always thought of her as a distant memory, a part of his life that had been swept away by tragedy. But Maggie wasn't back just to visit. She came with information about their parents' death. What Dogo had long suspected was true. His family had been targeted because of something Montgomery wanted hidden. His parents had been killed to cover up a secret, a dark past involving a deal with Montgomery that had never been fully revealed. Dogo's emotional struggle deepened as he found himself facing the haunting reality that his family's death wasn't an accident. It was part of the web of deceit Montgomery had woven. Dogo's need for revenge intensified, not just for his own loss, but for his parents' untold suffering. Maggie's return also rekindled old wounds. The bond between the siblings was strained, and their conversations were filled with anger and unresolved grief. Dogo was consumed by his mission, pushing Maggie away, but she remained steadfast. She had returned to help him fight the very man who had torn their family apart. But the truth she brought also pushed Dogo closer to a moral precipice. Was his vengeance worth sacrificing the family he still had left? When the heart is broken, it's hard to know where to place the pieces. As Dogo's investigation into Montgomery continued, Silver Creek became more and more divided. The townspeople were no longer merely bystanders. They were active players in a war of ideologies. The townspeople who had once turned a blind eye to the corruption were now emboldened, but not everyone agreed with Dogo's methods. Some believed that Montgomery's wealth had provided the town with prosperity, jobs, schools, and businesses, and that fighting against him would mean bringing about the town's ruin. These were people who had long been under Montgomery's thumb but didn't want to face the consequences of toppling the status quo. Tensions between pro-Dogo and pro-Montgomery factions reached a breaking point. Rumors began to spread that Dogo was working for a bigger government agenda, that his fight wasn't just about Silver Creek, it was about dismantling the entire system of power in the state. Suspicion grew into fear, and that fear turned into violence. Protests turned into riots, and the town that had once been quiet now rang with shouts and screams of frustration. Dogo found himself walking a dangerous line. As he pushed for justice, he was losing the support of some of his most loyal allies. Deputies started to question whether the cost of standing by him was too high. Dogo's own deputies became divided. Some wanted to take Montgomery's money and run, others stood firm, but their loyalty was being tested in ways Dogo hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Montgomery played his cards with precision. He exploited the town's growing division, using his influence to make the people of Silver Creek question everything. He even started to use the town's own grief against them, offering them false promises of security and prosperity if they returned to his side. For every step Dogo took toward exposing the truth, Montgomery pushed 2 steps back. In the end, there is only one question: will you burn the world down to get what you want? As the deadline Montgomery had imposed on Dogo drew near, tensions reached their peak. Dogo now knew that he couldn't simply expose Montgomery's criminal activities. He needed to bring him down for good. It was no longer just about uncovering the truth, it was about surviving long enough to deliver justice. The town was on the brink of chaos. Montgomery's people were closing in, and Dogo had only a handful of deputies left who were still loyal to him. Desperate for a breakthrough, Dogo decided to take the ultimate risk. He set up a sting operation, a daring move to lure Montgomery into a trap and expose his entire empire. But he needed inside help, and that help came from an unexpected source. A former member of Montgomery's inner circle, Jacob, who had grown disillusioned with Montgomery's tactics, reached out to Dogo. Jacob had information, critical information, that could bring Montgomery down once and for all. But Jacob's loyalty was tested as Montgomery's men closed in on him. Dogo had to make a choice: save the man who could save them or lose everything. Justice is a long road. Sometimes, it requires the ultimate sacrifice. The final confrontation was set in motion. Dogo and his remaining deputies, along with Rachel and Jacob, prepared to make their final stand. Montgomery had a private meeting with a group of powerful politicians, and Dogo had one chance to end it all. The night before the showdown, Dogo stood on the roof of the sheriff's office, looking over the town he had sworn to protect. The lights of Silver Creek shimmered in the distance, but everything was blurred by the weight of what he was about to do. The next day, the town erupted into chaos. The confrontation unfolded as Dogo led his team to Montgomery's compound. But as they entered the gates, they realized that Montgomery had anticipated their every move. A bloody standoff ensued. Montgomery's men fought back fiercely, and the town's last hope for justice hung in the balance. As the dust cleared, Silver Creek was forever changed. The price of the truth was steep, and the sacrifices were immense. But in the end, Sheriff Dogo had won. Montgomery was finally brought to justice, and the town of Silver Creek was freed from his iron grip. But for Dogo, the victory was bittersweet. He had exposed the corruption, but the cost had been high. The town had been fractured, and the scars of this battle would remain long after the dust settled. Victory comes with its own wounds, and healing takes longer than the battle itself. The dust had settled, but Silver Creek was far from the same. The battle for the truth, the grief of the fallen, and the sacrifice of the few left deep scars on the town and its people. Sheriff Dogo had delivered the justice the town had longed for, but the cost of his victory was not without its emotional toll. As Montgomery's empire crumbled, Dogo stood in the courthouse with Rachel Collins by his side. Their faces were marked by exhaustion, their eyes heavy with the weight of what they'd just endured. For every person they had saved, there were countless others who had been shattered by the violence and chaos. The town's trust in its leaders, already fragile, was now in tatters. The community's division was apparent on every corner. Who could they trust now? Rachel, having worked tirelessly to document and expose Montgomery's crimes, had become a symbol of truth in Silver Creek. But even she could feel the sting of the public's divided opinion. While some hailed her as a hero, others whispered that she had gone too far, stirring up a hornet's nest that would have been better left undisturbed. Even Dogo, despite his win, could sense the unease. The question that plagued them both now wasn't just how to restore peace, it was whether peace could even be restored. At home, Dogo and Rachel faced a new kind of challenge: healing. For Dogo, the physical wounds were manageable. He had taken hits, his body battered, but it was his emotional scars that began to haunt him. He couldn't shake the faces of the fallen, his deputies, the innocent lives lost in the crossfire, and the shadow of Montgomery's manipulation. Rachel, too, found herself haunted by the choices they had made. Was it worth it? The violence, the betrayal, the families torn apart? She had worked relentlessly to bring Montgomery to justice, but now she struggled with her own remorse. She had pushed for truth, But what if that truth had destroyed Silver Creek? After the storm, the land lies bare, waiting to be rebuilt, but who will rebuild it? In the weeks that followed Montgomery's arrest, Silver Creek began the slow, painful process of recovery. The town wasn't the same. The new sheriff's office, while standing as a beacon of justice, felt empty. Dogo took on his new role with solemnity. Every step he took as sheriff was a reminder of the violence that had come before, and every decision he made carried the weight of what he had lost. But there were whispers now of a new threat, one that Dogo hadn't expected. Montgomery's capture had shaken the local business community, but it had also awakened something darker, a network of corrupt businessmen and politicians who had been operating in the shadows, waiting for Montgomery's fall to make their own move. It became clear that Dogo's victory had not only toppled Montgomery, it had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched far beyond Silver Creek's borders. The investigation into Montgomery's activities opened the floodgates, and more secrets began to surface. Some of the people closest to Dogo were involved, but others were too scared to come forward. A mysterious figure began to emerge from the shadows, someone who had been working in the background to ensure that Montgomery's empire remained intact, even in his absence. This person had connections deep within the town, within the police force, and even in the state government. It was clear now that the battle for Silver Creek was far from over. Meanwhile, Rachel received an anonymous tip, a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a simple message: "The war's not over. Watch your back." It was signed, "Someone who knows." Dogo and Rachel realized that Montgomery's arrest had only been the beginning of a larger battle, a battle that would test their very lives and their loyalty to Silver Creek. The people they thought they could trust were now under suspicion, and the very foundations of their fight for justice seemed to be crumbling before their eyes. There is always another layer to peel back, and the deeper you go, the darker it gets. Despite the growing threats, Dogo remained committed to his mission. He knew that Silver Creek's recovery would require more than just the fall of one man. The systemic corruption that had plagued the town for decades had not been eradicated, it had merely been exposed. Now, Dogo had to face the ugly truth. The fight for justice wasn't just about uncovering the criminal mastermind. It was about rooting out the evil that had infected the very fabric of the town's institutions. As Dogo's investigation deepened, he learned of the silent war that had been fought for control over the town's most lucrative resources: land, power, and influence. Montgomery had been just a puppet in a much larger game, and as Dogo pulled at the strings, he realized that the elites of Silver Creek had been playing the town for years. They were the ones who controlled the wealth, the politics, and even the police. It was all connected, and Montgomery had been just a pawn in their larger plan. The stakes now weren't just about a sheriff versus a criminal. Dogo was up against a network of people who would stop at nothing to retain their control. He couldn't trust anyone. Even the police force he had once been a part of was compromised. He began to see that there was no one left to turn to, except for Rachel, who had become his sole ally in this fight. But even Rachel had her doubts. She had uncovered a trail of secret deals and dangerous alliances that stretched far beyond Silver Creek, to the very heart of the state's political power. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous the investigation became. Dogo and Rachel were playing a game where the rules kept changing, and every move they made put them in greater danger. In the end, justice is not just about the law, it's about courage. The final confrontation was inevitable. Dogo knew it was coming. The corrupt forces within the state, the business leaders who had been pulling the strings, were preparing to make their move. They would stop at nothing to retain their grip on power, and they would use every resource at their disposal to destroy Dogo and anyone who stood in their way. As the confrontation neared, Dogo found himself standing at the edge of a precipice. His duty as sheriff had never felt so heavy, and the weight of every decision was overwhelming. He had lost so much: his family, his friends, his peace of mind, but he had also gained something: a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about defeating the bad guys. It was about standing for something greater than himself, a vision of justice that was bigger than Silver Creek. It was about giving the town a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find hope once more. In the final standoff, Dogo and Rachel faced the true masterminds behind the conspiracy. The truth was now more dangerous than ever. But with courage in their hearts, they made their last stand, determined to take down the corrupt empire once and for all. After the storm, the soil is fertile again. It's time to rebuild. The battle was won, but the scars of the war would remain. The people of Silver Creek had been forever changed. The town was fractured, but the spirit of resilience burned brighter than ever. Dogo had sacrificed everything, his peace, his sanity, and his family, for the truth. And though the town had been torn apart, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Dogo, now the true symbol of justice, stood at the center of a town ready to rebuild. Rachel by his side, they vowed to bring about true change, to root out the corruption once and for all. It would take time, but they were willing to fight for the future of Silver Creek. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Silver Creek was broken, but it was no longer defeated. With the right leadership, it would rise again, stronger, united, and forever free from the chains that had bound it for so long. Thanks for watching. If you're hooked on gripping stories like this, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Your support means the world to us. With love and gratitude, I invite you to join our community for more captivating content. Subscribe now for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you.